Coming off their bye week, and hopefully with all that momentum they built up against the Cincinnati Bengals, the Cleveland Browns came out and got thumped by the Miami Dolphins, and erasing any and all good thoughts that people had into it, putting them right back into a headspace that I can only say I'm grateful that did not happen during the bye week, as people are ready to tear this team down, blow it up, and God only knows what else. Not the effort we were looking for or hoping for. I certainly talked about what I was looking to see from this team. But the Browns get drubbed. In many ways, it feels like we're back to square one, even though we're really not. But nevertheless, now looking ahead to play the Buffalo Bills, which it probably is feeding into that frustration a little bit, is suddenly there's a feeling of helplessness with the Bills being as good as they are. But here we are. Bree, how do we feel about the team today?
Well, Pete, as I confessed prior to recording this episode, I watched 0 minutes of this football game on Sunday against the Dolphins because I was en route to a gymnastics competition in Cleveland. So I listened to the first half on my drive there. I had the ability to do that. And I figured that I would go to the meet, I'd periodically check updates, and then I would go home and eventually rewatch the game. I was sorely disappointed because I was checking updates and things were not going well at all, that I finally stopped checking updates and decided I would never watch this game ever in my life, not even for this podcast. So I apologize. I'm not feeling great about the Browns, Pete. I am sitting here questioning, like, this team is just bad?
There are some things that are worth wondering, but I think the question most people are really looking for an answer for: did you come away with Taylor Swift tickets?
So funny that you should ask that, because it was a very stressful day on Tuesday, one that involved waiting 5 hours in a line queue. But I was able to successfully purchase tickets. I did not confide in my husband prior to purchasing. He saw the credit card charge much later in the day and asked if I needed to tell him anything, to which I responded, "No, what are you talking about?" and acted like I had no idea what happened and my credit card got hacked. So, but I'm victorious, Pete.
Well, congratulations. So all was not not wasted on that effort. So you've got that going for you. As far as the Browns go, and your daughter did well, which I was happy to hear.
She had the best time. And honestly, it was very nice. I will say, I know that people joke about like not watching the Browns and just having a normal Sunday and not having your mood be ruined by the football team. But I will say it was a very different Sunday for me, because although I knew that they had lost and they had lost in really bad fashion, I didn't watch it go down. So it was just such a different experience overall. And honestly, Pete, like on my drive home, I actually got to listen to like almost the full post game shows that was on 92.3 The Fan. And like, Pete, I think there's something wrong with me, because every time the Browns lose and I wake up in the morning and listen to local talk radio, I find so much entertainment from all of the angry people that call in to complain about the Browns and want to get rid of Myles Garrett and fire Kevin Stefanski. And they might as well fire JB Bickerstaff on the Cavs, because let's just fire everyone, even if they have no relationship to the Browns. I'm a sick person, Pete, because I find so much entertainment from the way that people lose their minds after this football team loses a football game.
Yeah. Callers on local radio, I can't do it in the best of circumstances. It's really tough when it's the worst. But as I said, I was very happy that your daughter did well. I was very happy she had fun with it. There is something to be said for your approach here, in that it is somewhat of a palate cleanser. And there is a certain amount of fan base that could probably use said palate cleanser that are holding on a little too tight. That being said, I end up watching it more than once. It was not a fun game. The thing that's frustrating, is the Browns started super, super well. Jerome Ford came back, and first kick return he gets to the 48-yard line, and you're like, welcome back, Jerome Ford. Because it has been dead on arrival without him. And then they, in no time, are down in the end zone. As fast as it took as long as it took Jerome Ford to get to the 48-yard line, it felt like they scored a touchdown just that quickly. The Browns have been magnificent early part of the game. They're script, executing early, and they go right down the field. From that point on, it pretty much went downhill on both sides of the ball. It wasn't.
So Pete, can I tell you? So I obviously was listening to that part because I did listen to the first half, and I'm a typically a pretty positive person overall. But do you want to know when I was like, oh no, like they're gonna lose this game? It was the moment that Nick Chubb fumbled, and obviously I didn't see it happen.
Sure.
So I don't even know in the manner that it happened, but it's very atypical for Nick Chubb to fumble the football, and we obviously scored so fast that I was like, Nick Chubb never turns the ball over. I just feel like having that type of offensive drive and then Nick Chubb fumbling the football, it just gave me a really bad feeling for how the rest of the game was going to go.
It symbolized pretty much how the game went, and it wasn't like a bad fumble. Zach Seiler, the Miami Dolphins, bang right on the ball, popped out. He made the right play. Chubb got up. It wasn't like he was sitting there trying to point at the ground or anything. He got up, knew exactly what was happening, and sort of somewhat dispirited started going to the sideline. And I think that was pretty symbolic for the whole game. It was a dispiriting, discouraging performance from a lot of people. Certainly, they were cruising offensively at that point. They were moving the ball well. And one of the things that was positive about this game, and I thought was interesting, it wasn't a perfect game, but you didn't have David Njoku. So Donovan Peoples-Jones became the second option in the offense. The second week in a row, he was the second option. And against the Bengals, he had 4 catches for like 80-some yards. He had that great running catch where he hurdles the guy, and it was good. But the Browns were so dominant in that game, you sort of get lost in the fact that Donovan Peoples-Jones played well in this game because everybody else played rather poorly. It allowed him to sort of stand out because he did do a bunch of good things. The opening drive, he catches the wheel route, a better throw. He might still be running, but nevertheless, 37 yards or whatever it was. And then on that second drive, Jacoby Brissett made a really nice play, steps up in the pocket, hits DPJ 17 yards downfield between 2 defenders. He found a hole in the zone, settled down, gains another 5 yards. 5 or 6 yards, and then they're in Dolphins territory, and you're sitting there going, that felt pretty good. It was 3rd and 12. Like, those are the type of conversions you're sitting going, all right, we can build something. And unfortunately, it does end with the fumble. Now, he did have a 4th and 3 play he couldn't come up with, and he had another play that he sort of dropped that would have been a big play that was bailed out by a questionable roughing the passer call. You saw him not only making plays, but you saw him being featured in the offense. They drew up plays for Donovan Peoples-Jones. It wasn't a matter of Amari Cooper's not open or Njoku's not open. Oh, DPJ's there. It's like that 4th and 3. They designed a play for DPJ and tried to go to him. They did more of that in this game, and I was happy to see that. But it doesn't take away from the fact that so much of the rest went badly. Offensively, was the worst game the offensive line has maybe ever played under Kevin Stefanski.
Was that surprising? Like, did we anticipate that?
There's two sides to that coin. One, they did not play well. Jedrick Wills was awful. Jack Conklin was the worst game of Jack Conklin's Browns tenure. But the other part of that is the Dolphins' defensive line now with Bradley Chubb is scary good. It'll sound like I'm sort of excusing the Browns' performance. I do think the Dolphins look like a Super Bowl contender. Not only do they have everything going really well on offense, as long as they protect Tua and his brain, with all the speed and the weapons they have, and everything's going really well on there, but they add Bradley Chubb, and it just changes so much for them. They're not having to blitz as much. Bradley Chubb is very good. Jalen Phillips looks very good. They've got Christian Wilkins. They've got just an endless supply of defensive linemen they can throw at you, and they just overwhelm the Browns. The Jets are the last team that sort of had that many guys that you could throw them at, but they did a really good job against the Jets. The Patriots, the only other team that sort of really took it to the Browns offensive line in this way, but it wasn't even close to what the Dolphins were able to achieve. So the tackles just got abused. The Browns, because the Browns are so bad defensively at holding the line of scrimmage, to not also hold the offensive line of scrimmage is death. They, for whatever talent they have, Jacoby Brissett, God love him, he's not that dude to make up for that, and few quarterbacks are, and they just don't have enough guys to sort of make up for the fact that the other team was just crushing them up front for the entire game, which is part of why this felt so, I think, bad on this, is just because the Dolphins were just so dominant up front.
So the other thing that I did hear on the broadcast at the beginning, which I know isn't an excuse, but just curious overall and like watching this team play, was the heat and the fact that they were exposed to 103-degree temperature / sideline versus Miami. I mean, like, Pete, like what I gathered from the whole situation was that, number one, the team gave up. Looked like they were not trying at the end of the game. And it was just a very, very sad display of football being played overall.
I agree with the second part. I'm less inclined to agree with the first. And it's so easy to say the team didn't put much effort forth because they lost. And maybe there are legitimate effort questions. But to your point, obviously they always do that thing where they show the thermometer. The way the Dolphins stadium is situated, the Dolphins bench is in the shade and the opposing bench is right in the sun. So they showed the Browns like with these giant black screens they were trying to hold up in front of guys to sort of combat the sun, and then like this mister behind the bench. But it clearly had an impact. I think some of what people saw was they were just absolutely gassed because of the temperature. Now, look, that's both teams had to play in it. Obviously, the Dolphins slightly less, but nevertheless, it's hot. Maybe the Dolphins are a little more acclimated than the Browns. I was curious to see if perhaps the Browns were going to try to fly down there early to try to, sort of equalize and do that type of thing. They didn't, but it clearly had an effect. The Browns defensively rotated their defensive line endlessly to try to combat that.
Yeah, Stefanski talked about that all this week, about the rotations.
Yes, it sort of helped probably a little bit with fatigue, but it also left you with the Browns don't have a whole lot of depth. I mean, their defensive tackles are god awful. There's nothing behind them there's no like secret stash of good defensive tackles they're going to bring out. So you're taking the best of bad and getting worse. And then if you're taking Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney off the field, it's to put largely rookies in the game. And there were times where like Isaiah Thomas is sitting there at right end over Laramie Tunsil, or not Laramie Tunsil. I don't know why I keep trying to call him that. Over what's his face, the dude from the Saints, and he Terran Armstead, and they just ran right over him and went right down the field and scored. Like, that's part of the problem, is like going to a game, you're saying, well, we have to rotate all these guys. You don't have enough guys to rotate. So it just made a bad, maybe it was going to happen that way anyway, but it sort of looked to me like it made a bad situation worse. The other part with effort is, I think some of that, and I think you saw this sort of in the Patriots game, is look, this is a team that is dispirited, discouraged, and exasperated dealing with what they're going through. You're in a situation.
Are they frustrated? Did they look frustrated?
Sure. I mean, wouldn't you be? Let's say you play linebacker for this team and you know that the two guys in front of you at defensive tackle suck, and you know this is coming. Like, it's akin to like being, Raiders of the Lost Ark with the boulder coming at him. Like, there's only so much you can do. I think that feeds into it. That doesn't make it okay. I mean, they're being paid, they're professionals and stuff, but it doesn't give you a whole lot of pep in your step, knowing that this is coming. That this is going to be a major factor. And then look, the fact that they haven't played well, I think they put. I mean, genuinely, after the game, they seemed shocked by just how badly it went. I think there's some point of this where, like, they really thought they had sort of done a lot to solve their issues, and they were a little shell shocked, and sort of like things started to go badly, and they sort of fell in that trap. Now, there are guys who I still think played their asses off. Sione Takitaki if nothing else, that may translate to effort. That's all he has.
Right.
I thought Grant Delpit was a guy who played hard. He made a bunch of like he's become a really productive run defender, coming downhill, making tackles. Now, unfortunately, some of those tackles are 6 and 7 yards down the field, so it's already you're already losing at that point, so it's not going to help. And then Denzel Ward, I thought looked like Denzel Ward, which I thought was pretty heartening. I mean, the Browns went into this game saying Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waller are not going to beat us. They're not going.
Yeah, and they weren't, right?
That is correct. They ended
but this is this is what, Pete, like how many games is this where they do a job, an effective job at stopping what a team is really good at, but then essentially give up a huge running yards. Like it's similar to what happened when we played the Chargers, or when the Browns played the Chargers, where it was like you effectively stop the pass game, and that's what you obviously know that these teams are really good at, but then it's like they just run all over you. Like that's demoralizing in a sense of like they physically can't stop it.
Nothing is more demoralizing to a defense than just getting run over. Nothing.
Yeah, I mean, it's just sad. And like I said, like I refused to actually watch it go down once I knew what had happened. And trust me, I've seen enough highlights. I looked at the play-by-plays and the stats. Like I was like, I do not want to subject myself to this, because even from a fan perspective, like I could just get a sense of like how bad it must have looked on television to watch it all go down.
Yeah, so there's two main things that worked against the Browns in this game. One, space. The Dolphins, and unfortunately a team like the Bills, can create a ton of it. They have enough guys. They spread it all over the field. The Bills have a quarterback who can throw it all over. They've got a bunch of fast guys. The Dolphins had the two fastest guys in the league.
Yeah.
You have to sort of have to play back a little bit. It's going to create space. You're going to have to cover more of the ground. You combine that with the fact that the Browns cannot stop teams that can both run and pass, which is really damning and really sad to hear and say, but they can't do it. Like, and it all starts with the line of scrimmage. But when you look back and you go against, you say, well, they played pretty well against the Ravens. They did. Part of that was because the Ravens were entirely one-dimensional. They did nothing but run the ball. And the Browns were able to at least put 11 guys in position to play the run effectively. Against the Bengals sort of like gave up on the run or made themselves one-dimensional, and it became entirely pass-oriented. The Browns can stop a team that's going to do nothing but pass. The issue is when they can do both, and when they stay on schedule, and you're constantly having to deal with that threat. And that's what you saw. The Chargers game's a great example of that. Justin Herbert had a solid game. I think he had 200 and something yards, but it wasn't like he was the guy just ripping them apart. It was just the combination of a couple passes here or there, and then just running for an ungodly amount of yards. They're sitting there going, what are we going to do about that? Like, there's nothing. They're asking some of these guys to do more than they are capable of in the secondary. So that's part of it, because they're so incapable up front. And unfortunately, there's no solving that. And that's been the thing. So like coming into the season, and you get in this whole thing. Well, is it a lost season, or the Browns are doing so much worse than I expected? And I guess there's some truth to that, but ultimately you went into the season, you're going, Deshaun Watson's not available for 11 games. And even though we hoped and we thought maybe, even though the Browns had nothing proven at defensive tackle, that somehow they were going to be better than last year, and they've been worse. I can't remember ever seeing professional defensive tackle play this bad. And it's leading to some of the worst run defense in the 21st century. I mean, like legitimately.
That's so sad.
And it's like, it's depressing. It's demoralizing, because to have a team just literally say, we're line up and try and stop us, which is usually what the Browns do to other teams.
Yeah.
Is difficult to watch, difficult to take. And there's, again, there's not much they can do to fix it. This is sort of where they're at. And unfortunately, that is leading to a situation where suddenly everybody's talking about, well, who needs to get fired, this and that, blow up the whole thing. And ultimately, we may see, a guy like Joe Woods get replaced after this, even though, and he may warrant it, he may not. I mean, there's certainly a case to be made that he deserves to be fired. The defensive tackle position is the responsibility of the entire organization. And a lot of the defensive tackle position this year is by virtue of the Browns making the decision to acquire Deshaun Watson. And we've talked about this, but the team prioritized the offense, prioritized the quarterback position, which is ultimately defensible. You can certainly argue whether Deshaun Watson should have been that guy, given the ethical issues that come with that. But if you're looking at this and saying, was it the right decision to go after a quarterback as opposed to sort of stay the course and just try to build with what they had? I think right now, if you look at where things have gone, they look pretty good in terms of the path they chose versus the path they didn't, even though it has come with a whole lot of warranted flack coming their way. And as I said all along, I think however much people are frustrated with Watson and his off field, the fact that he's not playing and why he's not playing are also contributing to the level of frustration that is coming out in fans, whether it's conscious or not. I think there's some level of, we've gone through like that sort of that period of time where we're sort of embarrassed to be a Browns fan because of what they did, and you're getting your ass kicked. It all sort of adds up, and it's a tough situation to be in.
Well, I tweeted about this earlier in the week, but I actually stayed up and watched the entire Monday Night Football game, Eagles and Washington, which I actually haven't done really this year at all outside of the Browns-Bengals game. And I tweeted, like, sometimes I hate watching other NFL games because I sit there and I watch the effort and like how hard these teams play. And I'm angry and jealous because I feel like the football team that I root for doesn't look like this. Like, it's like there's no give a damn effort or no give a damn level at all when it comes to watching the Browns play. And maybe that's just me making something up. But like, I was watching Washington essentially take on this undefeated 8-0 Eagles team that looked like they couldn't be stopped. And, who's Washington's quarterback? I forget his name. It's
Taylor Heineke. You may also know him as Kenny Pickett. Because they are the damn same quarterback.
Yeah. So I was like, I just like, the Browns in that scenario would have been the Eagles, except they would never be 8-0. They would be in the Eagle spot of like getting beat by this quarterback who has no business beating you. But like Washington looked super motivated to win that football game, even though they should have had no shot in winning it. I don't know, Pete. It's just like, it's so frustrating being a fan of this football team because we have so much more talent, in my opinion, particularly on the offensive side, and even on the defensive side, than so many other teams in this league. And we can't figure out how to pull out victories. We just, it's like we're so inferior.
Well, I saw that. I saw that tweet, and what I saw was the amount of people who thought this was a logical launching point to decide what you really meant by this.
Well, that's like every tweet. That's every tweet I put out, Pete. Okay. Like that is every.
Yes.
I also tweeted on Saturday morning that the Cavs, when they were playing the Warriors, Klay Thompson set an illegal screen and didn't get called for it, which set up the Steph Curry 3 that essentially sealed the game. And I like tweeted about how Golden State is still living and dying by the moving screen. And I had multiple people jump in my mentions to tell me that wasn't the reason that the Cavs lost. And I was like, never once did I say that was the reason the Cavs lost. I was just stating an observation. But yes, that is typical in my Twitter mentions.
So the thing that makes Washington really interesting that you happened upon that game, and that's the game you saw, is a lot of what people are ascribing Washington's newfound sort of energy level is Taylor Heineke. And it's not Carson Wentz. And Taylor Heineke, like, what's funny is I was at the one time I've attended the Shrine game he was there, and he has the most passionate family in the history of passionate families.
Yeah.
They're cheering him on, and you watch him on Sunday. It's not always pretty, but he's fun. Like he's easy to sort of root for.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of energy, plays with a lot of pep, for lack of a better word. But there is something to be said for, the difference between playing with Carson Wentz, not a super popular guy in any locker room, which has sort of come to light, as opposed to the guy where people, feel like he's really fighting for him. And this is not to say that the team does not like Jacoby Brissett. I'm not saying that at all. In fact, it's the opposite. The team loves Jacoby Brissett, but he ain't Deshaun Watson. And one of the things that I sort of expect, and the thing, making more expectations that this team is undoubtedly going to kill me on. I fully expect the Browns to be more engaged against the Bills by far. And it has everything to do with Deshaun Watson coming back to practice. In fact, I suspect that Deshaun Watson, in his mind, like as he's been sort of mentally preparing for this and having to watch all these games and not being able to be a part of it, was part of his whole thing was saying to himself, not only am I going to try to get prepared for playing and all this other stuff, I'm going to make sure that these guys are fired up and they're energetic and like there's a little more juice in practice. And if my theory is right, and nobody seems to have confirmed at this point that he is playing the role of Josh Allen, I suspect that's where that's happening, where he's trying to get guys to be more competitive. And they are giving him some reps, which doesn't sound like much.
Yeah, we talked about this last week. Yeah, so it sounds like, well, Stefanski didn't really say this in his press conferences this week, but someone had reported that, or someone speculated, I don't know, I heard this somewhere, that Deshaun was going to be getting first team reps, right?
Well, yes, that is true. And Albert Breer sort of said that basically today or this week, it's been like really all he's doing with the offense is getting accustomed to the play calling operation again and getting the huddle to sort of get used to hearing him. That's why, and again, that's why I think he's playing scout team quarterback and sort of doing it that way. But that's sort of where they're at with this. And then they're going to ramp up as they continue. But yeah, I think that is part of this. I think, human nature, I think, would have this group somewhat discouraged by the situation. And they're probably, they're going to say all the right things. And I do think that most of those players are just genuinely excited to have him back, even if there are probably a few of they're pissed off at him for obvious reasons. But I do think he's going to get those guys more fired up and more energetic and hopefully more prepared to play. Now, ultimately, they still may get killed by the Bills, but I suspect it's going to be
Snowmageddon.
Well, we'll see.
Did you see my other tweet? Did you see my other tweet, Pete, that I think the defensive scheme should be to build some snowmen on the field to have the defensive line at least maybe provide a little bit more of a push up front, perhaps?
Well, they might provide more resistance than
I don't know. These snowmen might be a little bit more mobile than what we currently have. More intimidating, perhaps.
Real men out of snow. Anyway, yeah, no. So that's interesting. Like, depending on who you listen to, the storm may be over before the game happens. It may be a complete non-factor. Meanwhile,
I know.
As we're recording this, there's a game between like Central and Western Michigan that's just in an absolute blizzard. Right for Wednesday night action. But it will be interesting to see if that were to happen. But yeah, I do think there's going to be a little more juice. I think there is a little bit of an element of, I don't want to say that Jacoby Brissett is the substitute teacher because that's really unfair because he has done a lot, but I do think there's a little bit of, oh shit. That's
probably a good way of describing it. That's not offensive.
Well, it's just because it's really unfair. Like I don't like referring to him as backup quarterback because he's playing 11 games. Like I understand that's what he is, but for all intents and purposes, he's been the starter this year and deserves to be labeled as such. But I do feel like there's an element of not only are there players on offense who are like, maybe straightening up a little bit more and making sure they're on all their P's and Q's because he's going to have an impact on their continuing existence with this football team, especially like some of these younger receivers. That all of a sudden they, oh man, I got to be, ready. I may want to go get more work in or whatever to try to get ready. But I do think like some of the defensive guys have to have some of the same thoughts where even though it's a body of work, I think there's some element where these guys are sitting there going, oh, if I don't really pick it up these last, 8 games or 6 games that he's playing, that may be the end of me, one way or the other. So there is this element where I think there's going to be a little more juice in this team, that I think they finally see the light at the end of the tunnel, which again, sounds like I'm slighting Jacoby Brissett. And I don't want it to feel like that way, but this is the guy these guys all know is coming. And the guy that is getting $230 million, the guy that gave up 6 draft picks.
Yeah.
He is the thing that this whole season has been about. I mean, the fact that this season is sort of like was a loss before we even started is for this guy. So I think that's going to have an impact. I hope it resorts to getting a better product. I can't expect the defensive tackle play to be any better because it's just they don't have that. They aren't good enough. I'm not sure they're NFL players. It would not surprise me if the 4 guys currently on the roster, well, 5 now, and any number of practice squad guys are all not back next year. And that would ultimately resolve in September. Some of those guys would be cut on cut down, but it would not surprise me if the room for the regular season next year is entirely different. But I look at this and I say, just the way I did against the Dolphins, as much as I'm sort of annoyed, disappointed, whatever in the defense, I was sort of slightly encouraged by the corners in that game because they did sort of look like they could keep up. And I want them to have that same attitude going against the Buffalo Bills. I want to continue to get guys that feel like they are trying to prove it against the best offenses in the league. And if they do have success, it will be a big deal. I think we're forced to look at this more individually than from a team standpoint, but nevertheless, I want to see those guys prove it. I want to see those guys grow because I would like to hope that we're going to see, the frustration of this season be worth something for next year.
I hope so. I mean, I know this is way too early to be talking about this, but at this point, part of me is wondering how much of this defense will live to see next year in terms of player personnel.
It's interesting because I've seen any number of guesses on that front, and there are some paths they could take. I could see a scenario where they keep all but 2 of their starters. Those 2 being defensive tackle. I could also see a scenario where they get a little more aggressive. Maybe they let go of John Johnson. Maybe they don't retain Jadeveon Clowney and don't bring back Anthony Walker. Obviously, who's a free agent, they'd have to re-sign him, and Clowney's a free agent, they'd have to re-sign him. But beyond that, like it's really hard for them to do too much. Unless there's a scenario where they like hire a defensive coordinator who has like breaks out in hives at the idea of a guy like JOK being at linebacker. They're not. I can't imagine a scenario where they're gonna be like, nope, can't keep him. We're moving on, or stylistically they said, hey, we've got to trade Denzel Ward or something. Like they are pretty well entrenched with Greg Newsome and Denzel Ward and Martin Emerson and JOK and some of these other guys. Sione Takitaki is another guy they would have to re-sign if they want to keep him. I suspect they will, but we'll see. Myles Garrett's obviously not going anywhere. So look, the entire thing I would be very curious to see is what would this defense look like if they doesn't have to be good, just capable defensive tackle play. Would we sit there suddenly be saying to ourselves, oh, wow, we're pretty good? I think that's probably, even if they're not great, I think they would be far better. Or are we in a situation where we're still sitting there going, why isn't this working? Those are the questions I have that I think are perfectly fair and get to be into more speculation. I would like to think that if they go in a different direction to defensive coordinator. I guess see JOK do some more blitzing and stuff, and using his speed as a weapon. But like I said, we've got plenty of time for that. So those are like, that's what it sucks when you're sort of drawing dead, which is what the Browns defense is sort of doing right now. You are left with individual hope that guys like Greg Newsome will figure out the slot more and more, that Denzel Ward will play like Denzel Ward, that Grant Delpit will grow on what he's been able to do, those type of things. But and guys like Alex Wright, Isaiah Thomas, some of those guys can make the experience they're getting count. But realistically, all of your hope right now is on the offense getting back to being where they are, especially this week. It sounds like Wyatt Teller is going to, I mean, I assume he's going to give it another go. Obviously, he didn't play very long in the last one. He tried, and they had to go back to Froholt. David Njoku's practicing. That could be a good sign for him. JOK's, I think Njoku was out today. JOK is back practicing, which could be good. But like, you're really hoping that the offense, one, that DPJ can continue carrying on the production he's had and the impact he's had. And when they get Njoku back, that all of that's going to just be better and continue to sort of flourish in a way that is going to allow them to play well when Watson comes back eventually, but starting this week. The funny thing is, blizzard or not, I think the Browns are sort of equipped offensively to deal with it. Jacoby Brissett is big as a house. He's played in a snowed out game before, even though he's from Florida, and won in part because he's just so damn big. And he's got big mitts. He's not going to lose the ball. So that sort of helps you out. They've got these big receivers that can sort of run over guys. They've got big tight ends. You know, their line is powerful. And obviously Wyatt Teller coming back would be very helpful from that standpoint. That doesn't guarantee much, but they are a team. You know, we sort of look at this and forget to sort of consider the weather until it happens. They are offensively a team that seems to be built to deal with this. You know, the Browns beat the Texans when Deshaun Watson was on the Texans a few years ago in an ugly football game with Nick Chubb.
I was there. I got that time hop actually. That happened like a year ago from today or something.
Yeah, so like they've done it. And obviously the Browns and Bills have had some wild games in the snow with, you know, Phil Dawson kicking field goals and an 8-0 win when the Bills had Trent Edwards of all quarterbacks. So it's interesting. I wish there was more. I could provide more reason to sort of have people be excited about this potential matchup, but like that's the unfortunate reality. Is like, and what I would say is, it's very hard for me to say that the Browns can't beat the Bills, despite going. You sit there and you look at that Dolphins game and you know, well, they got shellacked. Of course they're going to get that, but a lot of people felt the same way about, oh man, the Bengals, I don't know, it's going to be ugly. And then they went out and dominated the Bengals. I think part of the problem is the Browns are so inconsistent and unpredictable that they can come out and play well. Unfortunately, like that's the hope I can sort of try to sell anyone on in this type of game, because the Bills are a really good football team. They're not playing as great as they have been. Josh Allen and his elbow are question marks, but the Bills are a Super Bowl contender for a reason.
Yeah, like you said, this team is just so unpredictable in the worst way possible that they probably will somehow show up and win this game. I don't know, though. I think the only caveat to that is the Bills are also coming off of kind of like that heartbreaking loss. So, you know, I think it would be interesting if they came out and dropped another game. But as you said, Josh Allen and his injury is going to be interesting to see how that plays out. And then also like just the weather impact in general, which we don't know if it's going to be snowing or not snowing or what's going to happen. You would think that the Browns would need to be leaving if they're getting all of this snow on Friday, Saturday. Like, is there any risk of this game potentially being like moved at all or the time changing?
The idea of it being moved has been floated by people who don't have any control over it. Like, it's been suggested because even Kevin Stefanski has been in a game that got moved. In his case, for you know, all the greatness of having a dome, the dome collapsed in Minnesota and they had to move their game from Minnesota to Detroit. I don't think that there's been anything really mentioned on that front of possibly moving it. Detroit is again mentioned as a possibility. As to the travel thing, is the Bills are sitting there. Well, one, the Bills have a rash of illness going through their locker room, so they
do.
So they couldn't do a full practice today.
Oh
They had a
no!
whole bunch of guys miss practice.
Is this a stomach thing, Pete? What's going on?
Unclear, and I doubt we're going to get any details. But even with that part of it, they are also sitting there going, because of the snow, saying to themselves, we don't know if we're going to be able to get into the facility on Friday or Saturday. So on the one hand, you're sitting there saying, like you said, it might behoove the Browns to leave earlier. On the other hand, if they can't do anything, they may not want to leave until day of, even though that's sort of a weird, unusual, or that somehow they can get in there like the night before if it's going to stop or whatever. So it's a valid question, and it's it's in the same vein, but the exact opposite situation is what they dealt with Miami. Get there early to try to deal with the heat, or wait and just go as normal. They went as normal, didn't work out for them. Should they go now? Should they wait? See how it goes? It's an interesting question that it's hard to know, because it's not as there's a governing body over this. It's not like the two teams can go, screw it, we're going to go to Detroit or some neutral field. The league has to rule on this, and at least right now, no one's admitting any conversations with the league.
Interesting. Well, guess we'll find out soon enough.
Yeah. So I'm with you. It's frustrating. It's not fun to watch. What we saw on Sunday, I'm hopeful as much as anything that we get a better product this coming Sunday against the Bills, whether or not. Again, my goal is pretty simple. I'm not so much worried about wins and losses. Don't get me wrong. I would love to see them get that sort of pelt they can put on their wall by beating the Bills. But more importantly, I'm just looking for growth. I'm looking for competence. I'm looking for being competitive, especially on the defensive side of the ball. The offensive side of the ball is pretty competitive pretty consistently. And just getting a little bit, giving people a reason to sort of have something to take away from it, even if they're mad that the Browns lost in heartbreaking fashion. At least if they're losing in heartbreaking fashion, it means they're in the game. But that being said, we will be back to talk about it next week. Hopefully it will be interesting enough for Bree to actually watch it the whole way. But we'll see. But before I go, what sort of has been a barometer of this season? Jim Donovan's health.
Oh my gosh, I know.
This has been an awful season for his health. I don't know if you can directly correlate those things, but I'm doing it. He's missed 2 games now this season.
I know. I was thinking about that. I'm like, oftentimes I don't get a chance to listen to him call the games because I'm watching the game. And then the one opportunity I had, he was out sick and didn't make the trip. And both games that he missed this year were really, really bad, right?
I don't remember what the other one was.
What was the first one? It was.
I don't.
I'll have to go back and look.
If it's the Patriots game, that'd be enormously weird. The 2 games that they've just gotten.
Well, now I have to look. Hang on. Now I have to look this up.
For some reason, I want to say it was like Cincinnati or something, but that too near. It had to be earlier than that.
No, it was earlier. Was it? It could have been the Chargers.
Maybe that was it.
Yeah, it was. He missed Patriots too, Pete.
So the Browns play. All right, there we've solved the problem. Jim Donovan healthy, unhealthy. The Browns are bad.
Yeah.
Healthy.
Okay.
So we need Jim Donovan to be off the schneid, back in good health for the Browns to be competitive. The heart and soul of the team is apparently in the radio booth, not
Very
anywhere
true.
near the sidelines. So we'll see. Anyway, we will be back to talk about it next week, hopefully with better results and more interesting things to talk about than just losing. But regardless, we'll be here. Tell a friend, whatever, do all the like stuff, and we'll talk to you next week.